In a big, busy city where tall buildings reached for the sky, there lived a man named Robert. Now, Robert was no ordinary guy. He was a businessman, and not just any businessman. He was sharp, clever, and always on the lookout for ways to get ahead in the tough world of business. Robert lived in a fancy apartment with a view that could make anyone jealous. But even with all his success, he felt like he needed something more, something extraordinary to give him that extra edge. One day, as he was rushing to catch his morning coffee at the local cafe, something unusual happened. He stumbled upon an old, dusty newspaper lying on a park bench. It wasn't just any newspaper, it looked like it came from a different era. Its pages were yellowed, and the headlines were filled with events that hadn't even happened yet. Robert couldn't believe his eyes. This wasn't your regular newspaper, it was something mysterious, something magical. It seemed to predict the future. Imagine knowing what would happen before it actually did. Robert's ambitious mind began to spin with possibilities. Curiosity got the best of him, and he picked up the newspaper, holding it in his hands like a hidden treasure. Little did he know that this chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would change his life forever. Now that Robert had this incredible newspaper that could predict the future, he couldn't help but dive deeper into its mysteries. He started testing it, like a kid. As you can imagine, Robert's fascination with the newspaper grew stronger every day. It was as if he had a crystal ball that showed him the way forward. He felt invincible, like he held the keys to the kingdom. With the newspaper's help, Robert began making business decisions that were nothing short of genius. He invested in companies that were about to skyrocket in value, and he sold stocks just before they crashed. He became incredibly rich and powerful, and people in the business world began to envy him. Everyone wanted to know his secret, but Robert kept it locked away, a precious secret known only to him. Supporting characters in Robert's life couldn't help but be fascinated and a little bit suspicious of his newfound success. His friends and colleagues saw him rising to the top of the business world, and they couldn't understand how he was doing it. They wondered at his wealth and power, but they also noticed that something had changed in him. He was becoming more secretive and distant, and the newspaper seemed to be the key to it all. Some people were amazed and wanted to get closer to Robert, hoping to share in his success. Others felt uneasy, sensing that something wasn't quite right. They wondered if Robert had made a dangerous deal with the unknown, and they couldn't shake the feeling that his good fortune came with a price. As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Robert's fascination with the mysterious newspaper grew stronger. But then, one fateful day, as he unfolded the paper and scanned the headlines, his heart skipped a beat. There, in big, bold letters, was a headline that sent shivers down his spine. It read, "Prominent businessman Robert's tragic end draws near." At first, Robert couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could this be possible? The newspaper had been so accurate about everything else, but this was different. This was about him, his own destiny. He tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a coincidence, a cruel joke. But deep down, fear gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that the newspaper had never been wrong before, and it might not be wrong about this either. The possibility of a dark fate approaching him haunted his every thought. Paranoia began to grip Robert's mind like an evil He began to isolate himself from friends and loved ones, afraid that they might somehow be connected to his impending tragedy. The newspaper had become both a blessing and a curse, and Robert was trapped in a nightmare of uncertainty. Would he be able to escape the dark fate that seemed to be closing in on him? Or was there no way out of this chilling prediction? The answers remained elusive, and Robert's world was about to take a terrifying turn. At first, he tried everything he could think of. He changed his daily routine, he wore lucky charms, and he even consulted fortune tellers. But nothing seemed to work. The fear of the impending doom was eating away at him, and he knew he had to go to extremes to alter his destiny. So, he dove headfirst into a world he had never explored before, the world of the occult. He started researching ancient texts and forbidden rituals that promised to change the course of one's life. He pored over dusty old books filled with secret knowledge, seeking any clue that could help him escape his grim fate. His apartment became a treasure trove of strange and mystical objects. Crystals, candles, and incense filled his shelves, and he drew complex symbols on the floor as he attempted rituals passed down through the ages. He even sought out reclusive and enigmatic individuals who were rumored to possess knowledge of the supernatural. One fateful night, as he was deep into his research, a knock echoed through his apartment. When he opened the door, a mysterious figure stood before him, cloaked in shadows. This enigmatic stranger claimed to have the power to change destiny itself. Robert, desperate and willing to do anything, welcomed the figure into his home. That person told him some rituals to do to get rid of that situation. With the mysterious figure's arrival and promises of changing his destiny, Robert's life took a turn for the eerie and unsettling. He was now ready to interfere with the supernatural in ways he had never imagined. His first attempts involved performing forbidden rituals he had discovered in the ancient texts he had collected. He lit candles in darkened rooms, drew intricate symbols on the floor, and chanted incantations. Each ritual was like a step deeper into the unknown, and Robert was determined to do whatever it took to alter his grim fate. But as he delved further into the supernatural world, the first signs of malevolence. At first, Robert tried to convince himself that these occurrences were just figments of his imagination, mere coincidences. But deep down, he knew that something sinister was at play. The supernatural forces he had summoned were not to be played with, and they seemed to grow stronger with each ritual he performed. The sense of impending doom hung over Robert like a dark cloud. He couldn't turn back now, even if he wanted to. Desperation had consumed him, and he was willing to go to the darkest corners of the supernatural world to change his destiny. As Robert continued to delve deeper into the world of the supernatural, his mental state began to deteriorate rapidly. Fear and paranoia gripped him like a vice, squeezing the once confident businessman into a shell of his former self. Every night was a torment for Robert. Sleep eluded him, and when he did manage to doze off, he was plagued by terrifying nightmares. In his dreams, he would see himself trapped in a web of shadows, pursued by unseen malevolent forces. He'd wake up in cold sweats, his heart pounding in his chest. During the day, sinister occurrences seemed to haunt his every step. Eerie whispers filled the air, their words incomprehensible but undeniably malevolent. He would catch glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of his eye, vanishing when he turned to confront them. The line between reality and nightmare blurred in a confusing dance. Robert struggled to distinguish between what was real and what was a product of his unraveling mind. He questioned his own sanity as he became increasingly isolated from the outside world. Friends and colleagues had become distant memories, replaced by the relentless torment of the supernatural. With each passing day, the tension in Robert's life grew thicker, like a storm cloud ready to burst. The newspaper's chilling prediction drew nearer, and the countdown to his fateful night had begun. As the clock ticked closer to the foretold date, Robert found himself growing increasingly isolated. His friends and colleagues, once eager to be in his company, had become distant strangers. They had seen the change in him, the fear and paranoia that had taken hold, and it frightened them. They didn't understand what he was going through, and they couldn't bear to be a part of his descent into madness. Robert's luxurious penthouse, once a symbol of his success, had become a gilded cage. He roamed its lavish halls alone, the silence broken only by the unsettling sound of his own footsteps. The grandeur of his surroundings had lost its luster, replaced by an overwhelming sense of impending dread. The walls seemed to close in on him, the very air in the room growing heavy with anticipation. The date on the newspaper drew nearer, and Robert knew that his world was on the brink of an irrevocable change. The once confident businessman was now a haunted figure, tormented by his obsession with altering his destiny and the malevolent forces he had unwittingly awakened. Robert was teetering on the edge of an abyss, and the night foretold in the newspaper was drawing closer with each passing minute. He knew he had to do something, anything, to escape his grim fate. So, what did he do? Well, let me tell you, his attempts became increasingly desperate, and some might say downright reckless. First, he turned to even darker and more dangerous rituals than before. He scoured ancient books for spells and incantations that promised to change destiny itself. In the dim candlelight of his penthouse, he chanted words that sent shivers down his spine and performed rituals that defied the laws of nature. It was as if he was making a deal with the devil himself. But that wasn't the end of it. Robert's desperation led him to seek out mysterious figures with knowledge of the supernatural. These shadowy individuals promised him solutions, but they always came at a terrible cost. Robert, blinded by fear, was willing to pay any price to avoid his tragic end. His actions became more and more reckless as he lost himself in the madness of his quest. He would wander the city at odd hours, seeking out answers in places most people wouldn't dare to tread. His once sharp mind had become a tangled mess of fear and obsession. As Robert's desperation grew, he found himself facing an offer he couldn't refuse, though it came from the most sinister of sources. Enter the malevolent entity, a dark and ancient spirit that seemed to ooze darkness. This entity, lurking in the shadows, offered Robert a Faustian bargain, a deal that could change his destiny. The catch? Well, it was a deal with the devil, figuratively speaking. Robert's inner turmoil was a tempest of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was desperate to escape the looming tragedy. The entity promised him a way out, a path to a future without the shadow of death hanging over him. But, and it's a big but, Robert couldn't ignore the ominous price. Every fiber of Robert's being was torn as he contemplated the dark pact. He knew the consequences of such a deal could be catastrophic, but fear can drive a person to make unthinkable choices. The relentless ticking of the clock reminded him that time was running out, and the night of reckoning was drawing near. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the city plunged into darkness, Robert felt a shiver crawl down his spine. The hours leading up to the night had been filled with a sense of impending doom, and he couldn't escape the feeling that the world around him was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. Robert knew he had to prepare. He locked himself in his opulent. He paced back and forth, his heart pounding in his chest, as he contemplated the choices he had made and the darkness that had closed in around him. As the night wore on, eerie occurrences intensified. The lights flickered and cast eerie shadows on the walls. Unseen whispers grew louder, their words indistinct but filled with malevolence. The air felt heavy as if it was charged with a supernatural presence. Outside, the city seemed to hold its breath, too. The streets were empty, the usual hustle and bustle replaced by an eerie silence. It was as if the world itself knew that something unnatural was about to occur. The tension was unbearable, and Robert's dread reached its peak. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the precipice of a nightmare, and there was no turning back. The night of reckoning had arrived, and the next chapter would reveal whether Robert's desperate attempts to alter his fate would lead to salvation or plunge him into an abyss of darkness. As the clock struck midnight, the penthouse was cloaked in an eerie silence. Robert's heart pounded in his chest like a drumbeat of doom. He knew that this was the moment he had been dreading, the night when his destiny would be decided. And then, it began. The room seemed to come alive with malevolent forces. The air grew thick and oppressive as if the very atmosphere was charged with supernatural energy. Shadows danced on the walls, their movements sinister and unpredictable. Eerie whispers filled the air, rising at And then, the supernatural showdown began in earnest. Unseen forces closed in on Robert from all sides, their presence palpable but invisible. Objects floated in midair, and the room seemed to twist and contort as if reality itself was unraveling. Robert was overwhelmed by fear, his senses in chaos as he struggled to make sense of the nightmarish spectacle unfolding around him. He had entered a realm beyond his understanding, a realm where the boundaries between the living and the supernatural had dissolved. As the malevolent forces closed in on him, Robert's panic reached a fever pitch. He felt a vice-like grip around his throat, choking the life out of him. The room seemed to twist and distort, and he could barely make out the shapes of the supernatural entities that surrounded him. In a horrifying moment, the unseen forces manifested themselves, their grotesque forms defying description. They moved with a malevolent purpose, their intentions clear, they had come for Robert, and there was no escape. The climax was a frenzy of chaos and terror, a whirlwind of supernatural violence that left Robert helpless and broken. The room became a battleground between the living and the otherworldly, and it was clear who held the upper hand. And then, in a gruesome twist of fate, Robert's life was claimed in the most horrifying way imaginable. The very fate he had sought to change had come to pass, and the consequences of meddling with destiny had led to a gruesome end. Gradually, the fan's blades start moving, but there's something eerie about the way they spin. Suddenly, with a terrifying jolt, the fan breaks apart, and sharp pieces go flying towards him. He screams in pain, and his life ends in a gruesome way, just as he had feared, despite his desperate efforts to avoid it. As the malevolent forces receded, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable horror, the room fell into an eerie silence once more. The night had taken its toll, and Robert's fate had been sealed in the most terrifying way imaginable. Dear viewers, this story serves as a chilling reminder that some secrets are best left undiscovered, and interfering with fate can lead to a horrifying end. It's a cautionary tale that leaves us with a lingering sense of dread, a warning that the supernatural forces beyond our understanding. Thank you for joining us on this spine-tingling journey through the haunting headlines on Phantom Tales. If you found this tale as gripping as we did, please hit that like button and share it with your friends. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications, so you never miss out on our upcoming stories and thrilling adventures. And remember, some secrets are best left undiscovered. Meddling with fate can lead to a nightmarish end. So, stay curious, but tread carefully, my friends. Until next time, this is Phantom Tales, signing off. Sleep well, if you dare.